All right. Welcome to the NABSW Sankofa podcast. I'm your host, Christy Love. The purpose of this podcast is to preserve the history and tell the stories of the National Association of Black Social Workers and the Leonard Dunston African Centered Neonym Circle, also known as the Academy of African Centered Social Work. This podcast is one of the ways we will continue to grow our legacy of advocacy in liberating the Black community. We will highlight our founders, sages, pioneers, and active members of NABSW. Listen in as we capture our ancestors' rich history, hear from our living legends, and individuals upholding the mission of NABSW. Thank you for listening. On our first episode of the NABSW Sankofa podcast, I'm talking with Mrs. Barbara Akins, a longtime member of NABSW, a member of First Baptist Church in Southeast Washington, D.C., the NAACP, Urban League, and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. She is a member of the local NABSW chapter, which is the Association of Black Social Workers Metro DC chapter. She is a pioneer one of our elders and has served as our treasurer, nomination committee chair, and steering committee chair. Mrs. Akins was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and is a proud alum of the Tennessee State University, where she received her degree in political science and went on to receive her MSW from the University of Tennessee. Let's get into our conversation. Mrs. Akins, welcome, and thank you for joining me. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you so much. Before I really get into the NABSW questions, I have to ask you and get some tips and share with the folks. How have you been able, you and your husband, William, been able to have a comfortable and happy marriage for 57 years?
Yes.
Please tell us. I got to hear some tips.
First of all, when I tell people how long I've been married, I always preface it by saying, I was only 5 years old when I got married. Okay. But, of course, right. Honestly, that's not true. But we, I feel very fortunate. Nowadays, a lot of places, a couple of places where we go when we've been on cruises and things like that, and they play this game about who's been married the longest, and they start off with everybody standing up, and you keep having people sit down, and so finally sometimes we're the last ones, and sometimes we aren't. There are people there that have been married longer than us, but it's fun. So, they always say, well, you all don't look like you've been married that long. I said, yeah. But at least they're complimenting us. We are both from Nashville. However, we did not meet until college. We lived on different sides of town. And of course, when we grew up, I lived in what is now East Nashville, and he lived in North Nashville, where Tennessee State, where I attended, Fisk University, and Meharry are all located. So needless to say, the majority of the Black population at that time were living over in North and West Nashville. However, those few of us, a handful of Blacks who lived in East Nashville, we all knew each other, literally. We went to the same, there was only one Black high school in that part. And so we all knew each other and went to the same schools. So as I said, I did not meet William until college. He had actually attended Catholic school for his entire grade school, from kindergarten all the way through high school. As a matter of fact, he was one of the the first classes. There were 5 young Black men who integrated Father Ryan High School there in Nashville, and he was one of those to do the complete graduation. Start off in the 9th grade and go through and graduate through the 12th grade. So that gives you an idea, that about our ages, but that the Catholic schools were also they weren't big on integration any more than the public schools. So it took them a while. However, as I said, we did meet once we were in college, and I guess the main thing, as I say to people, is that we did get married very young. I was still in school when we actually got married, and we've been able to have a friendship relationship, which is very important in a long-term relationship. So, of course, there's always ups and downs, and you have to give each other the space, let them be themselves, but also, know when to come together. And so we've learned how to, to live, to love, and to laugh together. And I think that that's the main thing. And we both love to travel, and we do a lot of that. We do not have any children, and so that has allowed us a lot of, on the one hand, with flexibility to do some things and travel and go places and do things that, of course, we didn't have to worry about setting aside the college money,
fund, the daycare, all
of that, however, I do have, at this point, I have 14 nieces and nephews. Oh, wow. So even though there was not, we didn't have children ourselves, we have been able to reap the benefits of parenthood through our many nieces and nephews. Right. And that's been wonderful. So it's just having respect for one another and being a good friend also.
That is good. Let me just kind of recap what you said about some tips for a 57-year marriage. Friendship, give each other space when it's needed, let people be themselves. So y'all were able to be individuals. You came together when you need to. Live, love, and laugh together. Y'all traveled and respected each other. That's good, Mrs. Akins. Thank you for sharing that. I also just want to share, and we've talked about it. We have some connections. I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee. My dad actually in Chattanooga went to a Catholic school. I want to say for elementary. He didn't finish there. Both of my parents attended Tennessee State University. And I went to school in Nashville. I didn't go to HBCU for undergrad. I went to Lipscomb University. And so I lived in Nashville for about 5 years. So yeah, and here we are both in the DC area. Yes. So thank you for that. So yeah, let's talk about how you got to DC. So what y'all moved together, you were in DC. How did that move come about to come up to DC? And then we'll really get into NABSW stuff.
The move came about by my husband. He initially had dropped out of school, and then he went back to school 4 years later. So when he graduated from undergraduate school, the very same year, actually the same day, I graduated from University of Tennessee School of Social Work.
In Nashville, right?
Yeah, yes, in Nashville.
Okay. Yep. I applied for that school.
And so, and I know, the deal that, I was in the very first large Black class that they had.
Mm.
We had 12,
Oh, wow.
12 students out of 60 and that was, quote, the largest they had ever had.
Mm.
University of Tennessee. So traditionally, they allowed 2 Black students in their first year class.
Wow.
Up until the year before I came, and then they upped it to 4. And so
Wow.
that kind of thing. But at any
That's
rate,
interesting.
he once as he was graduating from Tennessee State, people came down and started, when they had career day and all that. So he started doing these interviews, at school about, for jobs. And it occurred to me as he was coming home talking about these jobs that all of them were out of town, and I still didn't think that much about it, but the bottom line is Xerox Corporation recruited him. And so we unexpectedly, for my family and my mother especially, we moved to Rochester, New York, right after graduation, and we lived in Rochester for 3 years. Rochester, Xerox made him an excellent offer, and so we moved there. I didn't know much about. I knew nothing about Rochester when we first moved there, and so it was a real. I always look back and say it was a learning experience. On the one hand, it helped us to get closer after I got over the initial shock, because once I had been there for a couple of weeks, I realized that this probably wasn't the best move for me. And that was still summertime. So, and then winter came and I just, I literally flipped out, because remember, I came from Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, I get it.
And I moved to snow country. And it was just not, it wasn't a good match at all. And I finally, I said to my husband, I was just crying and said, I don't know if I can stay here. They had snow mountains that I had never even heard of what a snow mountain was, until we moved there. But he said that he needed to stay there for at least 2 years in order to get the experience and then possibly be able to move somewhere else or transfer somewhere else. And so after 3 winters, we were able to, he went in and talked with his managers with a little nudging from me, and and he was able to get a transfer with Xerox Corporation, but we were able to leave Rochester. And he said that one of the things that they asked him is, why do you want to leave and where do you want to go? And he said, my wife is threatening to leave me, which I did. And she all because of the weather. And so we need to be in a place that the weather is better. And they gave him a choice of 4 places, which was Columbia, South Carolina, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Texas, and Los Angeles, California. We knew no one in any of those 4 places, but our families were back in Tennessee. And so we made the decision to move to Washington, D.C., accept that position because that was the closest and most convenient place to move once we left. To get back and forth between Nashville and to be able to see our families. The other thing also was that there isn't a large, I don't want to say organized, but professional Black population in Rochester at that time.
Yeah.
And so being this little Black couple coming from professional couple, that we were always, whenever we went places, it felt like we were on display because there were not many Black people around. So that was, that was the other criteria. I need to be somewhere where there is certainly a larger Black population, and Washington, D.C. fit that bill, and better weather. So that's how we ended up here, and we've been here ever since.
Okay, so y'all chose Chocolate City, which at that time and for many years was really
Chocolate City.
So you made a good choice. So now I know that you didn't start off initially wanting to do social work. You wanted to be a lawyer, but here you are from New York to DC. How did you hear about and learn about the National Association of Black Social Workers?
Well, actually, I was still in Nashville at the time, and Audrey Johnson, one of the founders of the national organization, moved to Nashville to work at Meharry Medical College. And so the Black community and the Black professional community is very, very close knit. They are in Nashville, and so she was when she moved to Nashville from Chicago, her first thing on her agenda was to organize a chapter for NABSW, and so I happened to be working at the local welfare department, state welfare department at the time. And she made contact and was asking for a listing of those people who work there. So working with Dr. Johnson, I was one of the founders actually of the Nashville chapter. And so that's how I found out about it, of course, through her and helping her found that chapter.
Okay, awesome. So it's interesting. Like I said, I went to Lipscomb. I did not hear anything about NABSW when I was in Nashville.
Oh, no.
Of course, I heard about NASW, but they did not tell me about NABSW at all. That was definitely a Howard thing. So when I went to Howard, so you was one of the founders of the Nashville chapter, and that is awesome. I did not know that, or did not remember that, Mrs. Akins. So thank you for sharing that. So once you got to DC, how did you get reconnected with the chapters or with NABSW?
Okay, so actually, let's not skip over Rochester. Remember?
Okay.
That's right. See, I left Nashville and moved to Rochester.
Okay.
It just so happened, even though, as I said, there was not a real large organized Black professional community like they had in Nashville, I was able to, through Audrey, and through, and the national organization, find out that they were trying to they had organized a chapter in Rochester, and the guy James Madry, who was the national secretary or immediate past national secretary, lived in Rochester. So I actually contacted him, and he was able to, I kind of helped him get the people back together again in Rochester. He had tried it and he didn't have anybody else to help him. So we were able to gather those people back together and form a ignite the Rochester chapter, and we were able to do that, and had our local meetings with the at the office of the Urban League, and that's how we got involved with the Urban League and got close to those people and started attending their conventions, was because Dr. Johnson was his name, who was the head of the Rochester Urban League, allowed us to use his space, and he became a member of the Rochester Association of Black Social Workers. So then when I left Rochester, I came through NABSW, I was able to get a job working at Alexandria Social Services, because one of the members had just been hired as the director of the first Black director of Alexandria Social Services. So they said, well, call Harvey. So I called Harvey, and he actually, he gave me a job working for Alexandria Social Services based on what somebody else had told him about me, you know. So the network works. I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like when in those early stages, networking worked like 100%, like,
oh yes,
just way better maybe than it is now, and hopefully we can get back to that. So awesome. Okay.
Oh, and then when I went to work at Alexandria Social Services, one of the first people I met was Miss Rosa Lee, who was working there, and she said, we have a chapter of ABSW here in Washington. And I said, well, yeah, because I just came from Rochester. So she brought me to my first meeting in Washington, D.C. chapter. So that's all from Rosalie.
Awesome. That's amazing. She's one of the next people that I need to interview. You, Miss Rosalie, and Professor Cragen for sure. I remember a couple of years ago when we honored you all and recognized, I remember y'all talking about the connection that you and Miss Rosalie had. So for NABSW, how has NABSW impacted your life as a Black woman, Black social worker in America?
Well, as I said, I grew up in a fairly close community there in Nashville, and up until I guess I had graduated from Tennessee State before I ever took my first plane ride. Okay, so that's how close we were, you know. But on the other hand, because we also had those 3 or 4 Black institutions there, you know, we weren't, you know, we weren't behind. I was just not, you know, I like I said, I didn't do, you know, a lot of traveling outside, but NABSW just opened up for me the rest of the world in terms of meeting people of like minds that were thinking, had similar goals that you had from other parts of the country, and developing that network for folks. It was just for me very, very mind blowing. But the main thing was just to see, when I started traveling, that I didn't want to stop, to see the differences and the commonalities of every community that you went through. There, you know, no matter where it was, there were a lot of things, you know, many things that were different, but but they were always some things that were the same. And one of those things for me would be what I saw as the oppression of the Black community, and not being able to having the majority of our people not be able to advance and have the same opportunities that I had. And so that was one of the things I wanted to always do, is to try to make sure that you bring somebody else along. You can't do the everybody, but if you just put in your mind that you're going to bring somebody else along. And I always feel like that's what Dr. Johnson did for me, because once I met her in Nashville, we continued our friendship, until her death. And she was always, Barbara can do this, Barbara do this, and all that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I didn't think, that was something that I wanted to do. She said, oh, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And so, and she was able to give me, that confidence to go on and do that.
That's good. The term that people are using so much now is voluntold. So it seems like you were told to do a lot of things, which, like you said, empowered you and brought confidence for you. So, Mrs. Akins, for purpose of like just history and time frame, and I know you're very modest with time frames, but like for Nashville, for Dr. Johnson, what year was that the Nashville chapter started? If you remember.
1971.
Okay. Around the same time that DC chapter was reunited, because I know they had a conference there. All right. So you talked a little bit about why or how NABSW has made an impact on your life, and just the oppression that we experienced then and continue to experience here in America. Do you feel like, or in what ways has NABSW liberated the Black community? You kind of talked about it with networking and jobs and just getting to travel and see all those things, but specifically for NABSW, can you think of some ways that as an organization we have taught or really liberated the Black community?
Let me go back to Nashville to start off, because that's very important. One of the things that we wanted that Dr. Johnson and Dr. Lou Beasley, who was also one of the people who started that Nashville chapter, who ended up being my professor at the University of Tennessee School of Social Work. So, that was that intertwined. But one of the things they wanted to do, of course, is we have they said, we have a foster care problem in the United States. And that too many of our Black children are in foster care. And then those that are there, that was during that time when Black children were being placed with white families for adoption. And so what we wanted to do, or what our first big project in Nashville was first to actually look at the foster care system there in Nashville in terms of how many Black children were in foster care, and to start recruiting some Black families to take these Black children, and so that they did not have to be placed in these white homes, because that's what they told us when we questioned why these Black children were placed in the white homes, was because, quote, we have no Black foster families to put these children in. And in a way, that certainly was true, but they didn't have any because they had not tried to get any, and they had not recruited them. And they also made the requirements so stringent that most Black people couldn't afford to do that, because first thing is that one of them had to be home with the children. So you couldn't have two parents working. And so, it was that. So what we ended up doing, we literally had a list. We, whether that was legal at the time, but because somebody was working there, we knew how many Black children we had in foster care and where they were. So we started projects by having workshops to actually talk to our, and we started at church. Of course, we always gonna start at the church because that's where we are, and that's our community base. And we talked to the church members about becoming foster parents, and they responded. And we went around to several churches. We couldn't do them all because there are a lot of Black churches, but we did the churches that we were all familiar with, or we knew somebody there at the church and all that. So we were able to at that point recruit and get them approved for these Black foster care families. Once we got them approved, then we were able to move those children that were in foster care out of those homes, out of the white homes, into the Black foster care homes. At the same time, though, we were also looking at why were the children in foster care to begin with, and what we could do to stabilize some of our Black families so that these children could return to their own homes, their own families, or, and not have to be in foster care. So one of the big, most successful things that we did while I was there in Nashville is that we were at least able to move all of those Black children out of those white foster care homes. So we were very proud that we were able to do that.
It is definitely something to be proud of. I know that was a really big push in the 70s, and when NABSW really started, I know that that's still a push that we, want. It's one of our missions, or one of the things that we want to continue to do. But I think that is amazing how you all really focused on that and came together and was able to recruit and train and really prepare Black families to take on our Black children, because it's needed today.
Yes.
And it was really needed back in that time. So NABSW has done a lot. You've been around for a long time, a long time member. Where do you see, how do you see NABSW now, and how do you see us moving forward? Like, what are some things that you hope we continue to do or should do? I know that was kind of a loaded question, but let's just talk about where do you see us now and where do you see us going?
Well, of course, the world has changed. So there are still issues in terms of the foster care system, and the national organization has still tried to get back to focusing on that, because I think that really, really is very, very important. We've learned over the years that people certainly can be educated, and so that there is not this cut and dried as it was back then, that you we absolutely can't, don't want a Black child in a non-Black home. However, that's our preference, that you would always try to make sure that the first choice is actually trying to reconnect them with their families and get them back into their own homes. When you cannot do that, then the next step would be to still get them in the foster care home that is also Black. But I've learned through personal experience too, that there are many white families who reach out and have been able to do very, very fantastic jobs raising some Black children. but they put effort into it. It was not, you know, it
Wasn't
wasn't an
easy.
easy task
Right.
at all. But you know, I mean, they literally took classes and just did all kinds of things to be able to do that. So our rule is not as hard and fast, you know, as it used to be, which I think is good. But we still need to focus on, I think, more of getting back to um, looking at this whole foster care system that is right now continuing to be kind of broken. And we want to know, I think that we should actually look into more of what it is that we can do about this foster care system and help fix it.
Yeah.
But right, we just really need to help fix it. But there are so many other things that are going on, and we know people can't, our focus can be as limited as it was back in the day. And so people are entering all different avenues and doing a lot of things. And I think that that is good, and that the NABSW should continue to focus to spread out our endeavors to the many, many areas. But I do think that as an organization, we do have to somewhat limit what we can, our focus, so that we can see some tangible results.
Right.
We've had a lot of people to be successful in many, many areas, and areas that we would have never thought that, you know, would have happened. But as I said, we still having issues with this foster care. And so as long as we continue to have issues, for me, I think that should be one of the big focuses for our national organization.
Okay, I hear you're passionate about the foster care system. And I do think it's important. I do think we've kind of got away from that, especially since I've been a member. I know about it, like I know that was a big push, but we definitely, from my experience, or it hasn't been that big of a push like it was when you back in the 70s and 80s. And so I do hear you saying we definitely should do a lot more in different areas, and we also need to narrow it down, limit where we can see the success of the organization. So just quick question, like, were you and your husband, were y'all ever open to being foster parents, or were y'all ever foster parents? Or you really were the advocacy, you really wanted to make sure other Black families were able to provide that?
We were never foster parents, and I actually that never came up for me, simply because I was helping teaching some of the classes.
Okay.
And I didn't necessarily, I'm a person that likes to be out and about.
You definitely said that in the beginning.
Okay, and so you know, and
I just had to ask.
Tell you what, technically, to tell you the truth, I don't think I'll be a real good parent.
Look, you were honest with yourself. You do. That's good to be. That's so funny, Miss Akins. But hey, you knew how to teach the classes and the workshops, so that's good. So here's just we're almost wrapping up. What advice do you have for new and upcoming Black social workers, and even for me? Like, what is some sound advice that you have for us as Black social workers in America and just the world?
Well, I don't want to go global now, but
you might. Somebody might listen to this in Africa or something, you know.
But I guess one of the things that I think that everybody should do is find your passion. Figure out what it is that you want to do and go for it. That's the one thing going to a small segregated school in for high school, I was fortunate because in many ways it ended up being like a private school.
Mm-hmm.
We had all Black teachers, of course, because I was, the school was Black, and the classes weren't overcrowded, and they all cared about what we did. And so they pushed us, to limits that, we didn't think that, we could do, but they also encouraged us and made us feel empowered.
Yeah.
And I see that same formula that they use that in a lot of the charter schools I noticed here, empowering the students, making them feel like you can do whatever you want to do and go for it. And I think that's really, really important to be able to do that and to do what you love. Because if you are just it's hard to be in social work, and we do have people like that who are in it for the money or because it is a job. And we all know it is not the best paying job in the world. So you really, if you're really in it for the money, you need to move on somewhere else. Right. But you find a niche, and if you say this is what I want to do, I want to help people to do this, or change something, one person's life, then go for that. Even when people tell you that, oh, that's not possible. What I found out is that it may not be possible to do it this way, but if you think about it, and it's possible to do it in a different way. And so, as just look at the sky being your limit and being able to be happy and satisfied in what you do, rather than just looking at it for the money. That was the one thing that I used to laugh about when we first moved to Rochester. I honestly, because they offered my husband so much money, and we hadn't ever dealt with organizations. I mean, they did big things for you. And so we thought, well, this will be just great and great. Yeah. And then I got to Rochester and found out that money isn't everything. And so we made that adjustment, and luckily he still was able to stay with Xerox even though we moved. Yeah. But you have to sometimes make decisions based on things, your peace of mind and your happiness, rather than how much money you're going to make.
No, that's good. Because we can't chase money. It's good. Like, money does solve a lot of things.
Oh yes, and
but it shouldn't be like for your. You definitely get to travel with money. But yeah, so one of the things that you said is find your passion. Know what you want to do, love it, go for it, and be empowered. So I think one thing that you said about the schools just growing up, being in an all Black school, all Black teachers, of course that is still around. But in some states or some areas, that's still rare. It might be a Black school in the inner city, but we know there's not all Black teachers. So I think it's amazing, really, the time frame, like in the civil rights movement that you came up, it really was Black liberation, Black empowerment, all of those things. And I think we're still holding on to it. I think we just need another wave of it where we're really feeling good about who we are and what we do. And NABSW is definitely one of those organizations that we can do that. And I just want to throw in a plug real quick for folks that you do not have to be a social worker to be a part of NABSW. However, you do have to be of African descent, and you can find more information about NABSW at nabsw.org. And then our local chapter ABSW Metro DC Chapter.org, and it's many chapters in the country where you can join NABSW. And we have a conference coming up in April in Chicago. We have not been in person since 2019 because we know COVID in 2020, everything was canceled. So Mrs. Akins, I know you talked about, I asked you before the interview about who's influenced you and what was taught. Can you just kind of end on what your father taught you and why that what he taught you has impacted your life and how you move?
Okay. My father taught us. He was a smart person. He was kind. He was funny. He wasn't a strict disciplinarian at all, but he didn't have to be. There was 7 children, but there wasn't any real strict discipline because my parents were both really nice, taught us how to be respectful and all of that. So, we grew up very, very happy. One of the things that because he was my dad, so I just thought that was commonplace.
Right.
My dad was actually by day he was a custodian, but he also his passion was, and he played. He was a musician, and he played the piano and the organ very well. He was our church organist for most of the time while I was growing up.
I laugh, Miss Akins, because my dad played the organ and the piano at my church in Chattanooga. So he's an organist. So like that connection is just so amazing.
Right. So he did all of that. But the other thing was that they taught us by example. And when I was in grade school, my father was president of the PTA. And I didn't really see that was odd.
Right.
Until later on, and then you realize that most of the people in the PTA, there were more females than males, but he did that. And he used to write letters to the editor of the newspaper. And of course, and they would print them and they would have his name, there. And I just thought, so I grew up, if something, was wrong, I always wrote letters because he taught me to do that. But that's what I'm saying. He taught us by example and just said, go for it. You can do this. And so even though he did not have a college education, a degree, he was he was a smart person and he was educated, and we loved him dearly.
That is so good. You were doing advocacy your whole life.
Right. And didn't know it.
Did not know it. And you found several organizations that are doing advocacy and fighting. We know that we have to write letters, especially in this time. You got to write letters, call the Congress, call the people in your area to make a difference. So your daddy taught you well.
Yes.
And he definitely led by example by all of those awesome things. So thank you for that. Mrs. Akins, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you. This was good. How do you feel?
I'm feeling very, very good. And I want to say to you also that we are very, very proud, and I am glad of what you're doing to keep our local chapter moving and moving ahead, because we need that. I feel that there is a place for NABSW, and you are doing an awesome job leading us at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I received that. I appreciate that. And so yes, thank you, Mrs. Akins. But I just want to share with people, I'm in the cohort of the African-centered, the Academy of African-Centered Social Work, and this is part of my individual project. So Mrs. Akins is my first guest for my podcast. It's been a great experience. Our paramount instructor is Dr. Rhonda Wells Wilbon, and it's been a great experience. And so again, Mrs. Akins is our first guest. And so we appreciate your time, and we want to honor you, Ms. Akins, for your wisdom and courage to be Black in America. The NABSW Sankofa podcast believes the past guides how we live our lives today and how to plan for our future. There's wisdom in learning from the past, which ensures a strong future. We believe that there must be movement and new learning as time passes. As this forward march proceeds, the knowledge of the past must never be forgotten. And as we end all meetings and gatherings, we're not going to do 7, Miss Akins, but can we do one loud Harambe? Stay with me when I stop recording, okay?
Okay.
All right, we're going to do one Harambe. 3, 2, 1.
Harambe!
Thank you.
Thank you.